here when your name's on this screen. So, okay. Um, I understand that both these items were pulled so we could have a little further discussion on these. And I know that we've had, some other discussions going through, the different agreements with the assessing agreement. This would be the third year that we've been looking to do with the assessor and the relationship with the city of St. Louis, and some of the allocations of time, and how it's gone through the years. And then a little bit about what we were at, the proposed $66,990 from St. Louis. And the net is about a $26,990 that comes to the city for that. I know she went over staffing levels of looking at the similarity between staffing levels for realistically the past 34 years of where they may have been. The commitment that we had, that the city of Elm, the reappraisal gets us, I believe, on a much better plane as we move forward. I think there's no issue from anybody here that we know that we have a very professional and solid appraising department in what they do for us. I think this is in my opinion, over the last couple of years, has been a really good relationship between the city of Elma and city of St. Louis of sharing our expertise. I think everybody has benefited from that. I know there may be some specific questions, so I don't want to drive the conversation that much, but to see what may be more that's out there on your part. So, and Kathy, feel free. I mean, this is and so feel free, to jump in and help me answer some of the questions or anything that may come up as to what we're feeling here from this. That here? Somebody was doing that. If you want, I can go, basically we can look through the agreement and really and then get into the cost associated, because the agreement is a May 1st date that we would look to sign. And we're looking at scope of services for the city of Elma appraiser, which would be Kathy and her staff to handle St. Louis. They've been through, I know, some issues of having to make some changes, and that this has worked out well for them. The maps and the records are still owned by each individual city on the contract basis of what we're doing here. The record cards are maintained by both cities individually. One of the big issues I know for St. Louis was making sure that they had an appraiser that was available to people, because I think that was a big problem that they were having prior to this. And I think that as I've learned a little bit about some things now, is that not everybody has that of someone available actually to meet with residents and to do things. That the roles are handled, through Kathy and what her team does. From there, they handle 2 board of reviews. As she stated, she's actually sitting in a board of review right now for the city of St. Louis and completed ours last week. When you start to get down to the equipment and the different things within the staff, both the GIS system or city of Elma and city of St. Louis have independent agreements that function that way. The special assessments are done and they're provided to St. Louis. They're provided also to us into 2022. And what we put in there really last year was this 1.5 annual increase that would happen unless we decide to terminate somewhere in there. The employees are ours. They are the city of Elma employees. And basically this is what we're supplying to St. Louis is really that they're acting as the city of St. Louis assessor and for the city of Elma. And so we have that she's providing to them at that time. So I know that what Kathy had given out to everybody too is just some of the input of what we're getting, what I feel that we get that additional bump that helps us both in our general fund and be able to fund some of the other things, because the staffing levels have really remained pretty similar to where they've been for a long time. I would venture to say that the staff that Kathy's been able to put together is probably better than probably what Brian had to go through in the past with an assistant, and then maybe a college student, and even at one point maybe somebody that was out there reading meters also taking. But I think we found that was some of the issue that we've gone through over the years when we went through the reappraisal. Some of the cards information was old, hadn't been updated. to get us there. She gave you a list of what supplies are paid for, how vehicles are handled. Basically, wherever you're operating is what's being used. St. Louis has carved out space for them to operate over there. The miscellaneous stuff, when you talk about BSNA, we each have our own. Everybody's got that. Some of the sketching, IT companies, all of that kind of stuff is separated out. It looks of she's spending 55 hours a week as the assessor. And when we set this up initially, we knew there would be more hours for her. That was part of the issue of discussing how much she should take a salary as opposed to what comes back to the city. And then realistically from there, the property appraiser's still at that 14 to 18, 40 hours a week, and the assessing clerk 15 to 18. But we're always getting at least the minimum 40, and I would guarantee we're getting more than 40 from Kathy every week of what we get. And again, I think the other portion of this is, at this point in time, I think the city of St. Louis has been very happy with it. I think we've been very happy with how our assessing department is run and how it goes. And so the issue just is the agreement in everybody's mind something that we need to continue with and go forward. I don't know if I missed anything.
And I think I was the one that had really the most questions going into this and kind of threw a monkey wrench into the process. So Kathy was able to address everything in her note when she sent it back. And just to clarify once again, I never had a problem with the quality of work that we were receiving or that was being done. I have a very high degree of confidence in the abilities of the team, and that was never my issue. It was more about the breakdown of the workload and having some basis or some knowledge about how the workload was being broken down. So Kathy did a nice job of that, and so I'm satisfied with this agreement as it stands today.
I just add one more time. I think it does. It's a testament to both. It's truly one of those good relationships that you just have with your neighbor that has worked out very, very well. We continue to strive on those, and I think that this paves the way for some of the other things that we've been talking. I think that a good identification by St. Louis of what their needs were and how they could fill those at a certain time to come.
And I agree. I think Kathy's email had addressed a lot of things, and like Greg said, I don't think it was ever a question of whether we were getting good work out of Kathy and her team. It was more of making sure things were fair and that there was a logical breakdown of how we were determining who was getting what, from my perspective anyway. And so I feel confident with the way this is set up.
This looks to me like a win-win.
And so that you all know, I have talked with Kurt Giles, with city manager there. There is that same feeling on their part, Roger, that they definitely feel that. And I think it is. It's just one of those. It works, and as long as if we're comfortable, then. And I'm not going to beat this to death. We don't have to keep yakking about it if we're comfortable with it, and we can move on and have some discussion on the next. So if there's anything else that anybody has. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And Kathy, thank you for the explanations and for the talk. I think that it gives us it's one of those things you start to try to say, well, how much time is being here? And the reality is the job's getting done in both areas, and it's getting done very well.
Can I just clarify on one thing? What's the situation with Emerson Township? Is Kathy still doing that as well? And about what percentage of time is that going to take, Kathy? Just in a guess.
Yep. So Emerson Township, we calculated maybe 5 hours a week. They only have 784 parcels, mostly vacant ag parcels. We don't receive hardly any communication from the taxpayers. And the majority of the field work, like I presented at the goal setting, there was more parcels visited in Emerson Township, but more time was spent in the city of Alma. The parcels were getting addresses because a lot of the vacant properties and some of the vacant farmhouses, they didn't have property addresses in the database. So that's something for years, because when I got the database in 2015, the previous assessor, the state actually had seized their role. So I helped get them their assessment rolled back. And when I got the database, the assessor didn't do any of the backups because Emerson had a complete reappraisal, actually by the same company that Elma used back in 2007. But the previous assessor didn't do the backup of all the images, and a lot of the addresses were messed up. So here they paid for a complete reappraisal, but it wasn't maintained. So that's the big thing about maintaining your database. So we did gather a lot of the addressing. But Emerson, I mean, there's really not a lot going on there, and they do pay the city of Alma, you know, a small fee for their size township. So I think it's being fair. I mean, they contribute even to our education, and Jamie Weberg is the supervisor. I mean, they're willing to, I mean, I think Jamie and Matt has had a conversation. They are so happy that the city of Alma is doing this, because a township that size, there's no way that they would have a full-time assessor.
No, and they don't have anybody that can even answer a question on staff during the day or anything like that. So I think that in Jamie, and for what they pay, they feel they're getting more than.
And Emerson Township, they have a website, which is, I mean, they have a lot of wind turbines in their township, so they do receive a little extra revenue to be able to do this. They have their website. They have BSNA on their website that they pay for, so it's free of charge for the public, just like the city of Alma and the city of St. Louis offers. So taxpayers can information online. So that's normally calls that would be received by the assessor. So Emerson went ahead and paid for that, and you know, they pay for their own supplies and whatnot. I think when we first had the tapes, Pine River Township, quite a few entities, city of St. Louis, and we talked about the sharing of services, and we talked about what it could look like in the future. We have to start small, because I'm not one to jump in over my head, because that's saying if we had the proper staff. And the thing, you know, I understand what Mayor Mapes was asking. I don't think it was clear to anybody what the cost is to run the department. But I think once I broke that down and was able to show that it's not St. Louis is paying for their own software, their own IT, they're hosting all of the data, supplies, everything, even vehicle. So, and when I look at the staffing, that's when it really hit me too, because I knew what the staffing was with Brian for years, and he had a full-time secretary. He said that he would go to the city manager, but he never was able to obtain the proper staff and the proper tools to even do the job. He's in a township using the same staff that has been utilized for over 34 years. I haven't increased staffing, and we all know staffing is the biggest cost. So, and we're able to do it. We're busy. I mean, Hannah's sitting right next to me. We're busy, and Grace was just here earlier. We are working all the time, and we love it. This is what we do. And I'm fortunate to have these two people that are just as passionate as I am about what we do. I think we'd be bored if we this workload. I don't know.
You're not bored. So
Thanks, Kev.
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks, Kathy. If that's it, then the other item that we knew that we needed to discuss tonight was the interlocal agreement between Slipper, and I apologize, sometimes I will mess that up. Slipper is St. Louis, Ithaca, and Pine River, and the city of Alma for the long discussed transit service, of which they had done passed a millage earlier in the fall to pay in with the city of Alma. And just to give you some background again on this, this has really been a long time. A couple times I've had to step back and say, am I looking at this through the right lens, because I have been so involved in this for so long, and am I looking at this properly from the city manager's position? And I think we've had some goals to get here, and we're kind of now towards the finish line. And if we can refine some of these things, and I think we've worked on that over the last couple of weeks, because the need has been there. The talk has always been there for this to happen. This hasn't been something that was just the last few months. This was an 18-month process of a meeting between the slipper folks, they had to form a board and authority to do this. And they had to first do that. Then we were part of the process of talking through the millage language and what would happen. That was Brett and I to be involved in that. After we got over that hump, the agreement then started to come into play. And again, this was 18 months of sitting, talking about the different things. Slipper, because they were a new entity, had some things they had to take care of. So they actually brought an attorney in, Steve Mann, who ended up formulating this. But I have to tell you, this was with discussion. And if there's questions in that, then Brett and I are here because this wasn't brought to us blindly. We vetted things through Tony as we went along through all of this for the city's interest. And I think that, again, and we've had different talks. I think everybody here supports exactly what we're trying to do. We just need to make sure that we're getting this down and this agreement is something that's workable for everybody. What did happen over the last couple of weeks is a couple of the changes that were sent out to you from the original is I know that Tony and Steve had talked back and forth, and some talk's been about the different issues of what can happen with the fund balance. And I know what was included now in here under, which wasn't there before, under section 2.3, when you're talking about termination. Section D, 2.3D was upon termination that Alma shall retain any of the fund balance remaining for use as authorized by state and federal regulations by the Alma Transit Center. To me, we're going to put it in agreement, but that's actually law too. I mean, this has to stay as a part of the Alma Transit Center as to where it goes. And then the other section, I know that there was talk about.
Matt, there was one other change in that 2.3.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We wanted to make sure in C that unless we materially breach the agreement, that if Slipper bows out, they have to pay the rest of the year's cost too. They don't just get to leave and that's it. They got to pay the rest of the year as well. Those are the two changes to 2.3.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I had that marked and didn't mention that one. And then the other question really comes as we look at the makeup of the board, the joint operation board, which joint administrative board, excuse me, which is made up of both people from the city of Alma and from Slipper to have a say. And I think that the word approve is the one that keeps coming in section B and section D under 1.7. You'll look at the board shall review and approve all proposed budget amendments and right or fair changes. And then D, the board shall review and approve all proposed capital plans. And then the idea becomes the wrong part of it because it really talks to then the fact of any acts by Slipper or the administrative board that would cause an issue.
Yeah, and basically Slipper wants the more responsibility than they need to take, I guess, because if they make a mistake and that mistake either directly or indirectly causes the problem, they should be on the hook to the extent that their mistake caused the problem. So what we did was we changed the indemnity provision to say that we will indemnify them if it's our problem. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it probably will be. It'll be negligence in operation of the vehicle or, something along those lines. But to the extent that Slipper or the board makes a decision that either directly or indirectly causes the problem. And, as a lawyer, and it's a shame, but as a lawyer, you're thinking worst case scenario all the time. What's the worst thing that could happen? So let's say, there's a request to buy a new bus because we got problems with one of them, and they stand up and say, no, we don't want to spend the money. And then we're driving a bus that maybe we shouldn't have been driving. Well, if something happens, they're the ones that held it up. They're the ones that ought to have to, pay their share of that. So that's why we changed the indemnity provision to say that we will indemnify them except the result of any act or omission, unreasonable act or omission by either the board or by Slipper. And so basically, to the extent they make a decision, they may have responsibility for that decision.
In your example right there, though,
Truly has the wherewithal and the say in equipment is the state of Michigan. You don't do a bus, you don't do anything. As you've seen recently, and I don't joke about this lightly because in the time I was there, I couldn't get a darn bus, and we've replaced the entire fleet. There are very few situations that have come up ever within transit where there is this, we want to replace one, or we don't want to replace it, we're good with it, or somebody says, no, I don't want it, because they are shoving those down your throat when they become available. Here's the bus, here's the money. Why would you not take the bus and the money? Because it's available to you right now. And that's, the state has really the control over that equipment and those things.
Yeah, and Greg, to speak to what you're saying, I don't even know that this is ever going to come up. Like I'm saying, I'm talking worst case scenario situation that would arise where something that Slipper did or didn't do, or something the board did or didn't do, would either directly or indirectly cause a problem. The odds of that happening are very, very slim. But if it did happen, they would be on the hook. Now, if we make a mistake, and when I say we, I'm talking about Elma Transit, I mean, yeah, obviously we're on the hook. That's what the liability coverage is for. I mean, that's, and I guess Brent could speak to the, to the control that transit has as to what equipment they use and they don't use. I didn't mean to say that's what was going to happen. I'm just trying to think of, in my mind, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's the type of thing I was coming up with. All I was trying to say was, hey, look, guys, to the extent you want to be able to approve, if something happens because of that approval or you holding that approval, look just like us. And that's why the indemnity provision got changed the way it did. That's all I was trying to say.
Understand that, Tony, and shame on us if we ever do put any piece of equipment into operation that is not fit to be on the road.
Right.
Whether it's a bus or.
I'm not saying we'd apologize to Brett right now for even insinuating.
Yeah, that's okay.
No, that's true.
Enter his mind.
Sure.
But that's just me being a lawyer trying to say, okay, what, trying to protect the city. What's the worst that could happen? And that's all I could come up with.
One of the other questions that had come up too was about hours of operation and how do we make sure, because it is equal hours of operation. And one of the, in the transit world that's a little bit different is hours of operation. Really, if we're open from 7 a.m. till 8 a.m., whatever that is, everybody's operating at that time. They're still available for calls or that. There are still provisions that will be made in this as far as last time of ride, especially for some of the distance rides that we will have, which this agreement will not stop that from happening. There are some realities. Large transit systems cut off different times of rides that there's just no way we can do it by a certain time. And that becomes part of really a management decision as to how it works. And I think there's the idea of that we sit down and make sure that everybody's comfortable with that. But it's impossible to say that, if it closes at 8 p.m., that if somebody calls you at 7:30 and they're in Ithaca and want to get back to Alma, that's not happening. Those are things that are put in place for the rules and the provisions as to how it's run at that point in time. So not unlike larger transits, that's the reality of deadheading rides in transit is a big one. And I think that's where you get more secure about where your funding comes from, the state and federal government, because there are a lot of you guys asking me right away, how come there's one person on that 14-seat bus? Sometimes that's the way it works out. And it's, I think we've made a lot of changes to put vans in place, but some of those things are just built into an inefficient system. I think we've tried to run it the most efficient way we can now with more and more van options. So hopefully that will continue. But
I hope we qualify for the study to get paid for it through by MDOT, the SDNT funds. So
Matt or anyone, given that now we were expanding our coverage, we will be in higher speed traffic, more distance, so wear and tear, all that. Do you have any idea of the implications for our insurance costs?
Our insurance costs based on, at least from the transit stipulation, we're within the city's pool. So those are based on just pure numbers, correct, Sarah? How
many vehicles we have.
How many we have. There's nothing about mileage, nothing about that.
Okay, I just would strike me that
Well,
more miles and more risk, right?
well, I would say this. I think to the extent you got more, if you're driving more, the chances of a problem coming up are, it might be greater. But that's up to the underwriters. The big question is, how much insurance do we need? And $15 million is a lot of insurance. I mean, that's and you could play with that number, I guess, if you wanted to, but that is a lot of money.
Well, and unfortunately,
Our discussion with the fire department, led to a revelation over in St. Louis too, if you recall, that when they, built their new fire hall, they found out they really weren't condition. I'd like us to make sure that our underwriter knows what we're doing, who's involved
Absolutely.
and what the agreement is?
Absolutely.
So that
Definitely.
we don't find ourselves with coverage at some point?
Yeah, going, oh, whoops, because we get an annual review where they ask for all of the.
Well, frankly, I think you're going to
Obviously,
have
we would
to.
do this earlier than that.
No, you're going to have to let them know. I mean, obviously, when this agreement, assuming it's signed, it
Business.
changes things.
Yeah.
And it's going to require a different underwriting, process, and they're going to come up with a new premium. There's no question.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's all paid for with these funds. But yeah, absolutely, that's going to happen, and it's got to happen.
It's like when your 16-year-old starts driving, it
That's
is your
exactly
obligation
right.
to know.
Yeah, at least you're supposed to. You'd be surprised
Well,
how many
yeah.
people don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's absolutely right. That's going to happen. There was one other concern too that I know. There was some question about section, I think 1.5 that talked about the fact that Slipper, they might be able to, instead of paying us paying over the entire millage amount to the Elma Transit, they could hold back a small amount to cover their administrative costs. And the rationale for that is that's what the city of Elma does now. Our administrative costs come out of that millage. Greg, though, in talking to me, brought up a really interesting point, and something that needs to be, I think, addressed. When I'm working for the city of Elma in this transit situation, my fee probably ought to be coming out of that transit budget too. And that's something that I think we need to maybe clarify in the future, because
I think should go for any time that Matt or anybody else on staff spends on transit. If Matt goes to a meeting, it needs to be billed to transit.
But I mean, that I think, and that's definitely, I think, doable, but that was the rationale for it.
If we had an accounting department, I might have a little more confidence in our ability to do that. But
hey, listen,
I think that's a challenge we may not be able to meet at this point.
I would
I
be able
think
to do
there's
it, right?
a reason
Anyway.
also too for one of the things that Brett's put into place is I think one of the first things because of the, I don't want to say intricacies, but some of the differences with how transit is run. The reality is we've had talks with the folks from Slipper, and I think everybody's apparent that we need somebody there with the transit background to make sure that all of those things are being handled properly and are done that way.
The accounting.
MDOT will give you MDOT will definitely let you know what is allowable and not allowable when it comes to those kinds of expenses. And so I think that we can work right off their chart and make sure that we're getting everything. I do know that we do the majority of the administrative costs are all coming through there. You're right, Greg, how much time I've spent if I'm going to a meeting or we're doing that, it's something that hasn't been looked at and we probably need to do that.
I think we need to have a discussion before we hire an accountant for that entity as well.
Yes. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I think, again, I caused all this ruckus, I think, with my opinions here, but, I'm still uncomfortable with the fact that we didn't go one of two ways that we originally discussed with this whole program. Initially, it was presented as, these other entities were going to contract with us for service. I think this goes well beyond that. Their lawyer wrote this agreement, which gives them a lot of say in how things are operated. They're not just buying service from us. They're not just saying, okay, we need so many hours of bus time or whatever the case may be. And then the other option that we initially discussed, if it wasn't going to be a contract for service, was we thought it was going to be an authority. We'd form an authority. Well, they went ahead and formed an authority and wrote this deal for us and kind of passed their millage.
I'm going to say one thing. When I keep hearing the term, they wrote this deal for us. I want to make sure everybody knows that we were all there. I get an impression that this was just laid out. And so with all due respect, I think that we were a part of the discussion. I know that we have some things in here, but and every step of the way, I contacted our attorney to make sure that was there. So I understand there's some things in here, but I think that we were definitely a part of this discussion.
And I will say this, guys, too, and this is a little bit of a hybrid. Greg's exactly right. It's not just paying for service, and it's certainly not an authority. It's kind of a little bit of a hybrid, but it gives Elma Transit has, you know, a little more control than it would obviously if this was a standalone authority. And so long as you're comfortable with, like I say, you got the insurance limits and whatever, I think part of this was the idea that this hopefully is going to grow into something more. This may end up being an authority. It might encompass more townships. It might, and more area. It's just kind of I think that first step. And I don't know that, you know, this is probably going to be revisited, I would think. You know, hopefully this works as well as we want it to, and is as big a help, I guess, to the city of Elma and the surrounding areas, you know, encompassed by Slipper, that maybe there's other folks that want to get involved too. But Greg, I mean, those are legitimate questions. I mean, these were the options. They were the three options, and this is where we fell in.
I agree. And to renegotiate the whole thing at this point is not a practical matter. I mean, and I'm not advocating that we throw it out and start over, because I don't think that's, we'd be years in the making to try to do that. I think to try and recreate something at this point. But I think, my intention or my goal for all this was that there was going to be something here that was going to benefit the citizens of Elma. The citizens of Elma don't get much here that it wasn't already covered, that they weren't already getting. I think one of the things we could do, since we've so dramatically overfunded this operation over the past number of years, and I hold myself accountable for that too, that we didn't reduce the millage in the past. I think we need to take a very serious look at cutting this millage next time we have an opportunity to levy it. And granted, the Slipper will do the same, but I think the budget needs to be trimmed dramatically over what this, I think it's 0.92 mils.
9.6.
I think we could easily cut 40 mils off of that. 9.6.
And I think that was
so
a big part of the discussion.
That's for a
Greg.
future. I think we need to.
And that was a
Pardon
big
me?
part of the discussion with Slipper and the whole group. That's the hope, that we can look at this now at a point in time and be able to bring this.
That would bring some savings to our taxpayers, and I think we owe them that.
And I will say that's why the agreement says up to 0.96 or whatever it is mils. I think that contemplates the idea that we might be able to lower it. And the only other thing I'd say is I do think, and Greg, I know you agree because we've talked about it, this is a benefit to the citizens of Elma. I mean, as far as what this allows, it's going to bring more people hopefully to Elma. It's going to bring other places. They get to go places they might not already be going. So I think it is a benefit. I think we all agree that that part of it, I think, is an opportunity.
I think there is a little bit of benefit there, Tony, but I don't think it's proportionate to the amount of liability we're taking on under this, in my opinion. So you're the lawyer. You probably know more better than
Well, hey, not. I mean, with respect to that, it's. I mean, like I said, we are very well insured. I will tell you that, and that's all you can do. In the last analysis, you look at it, Greg. If this would have been the first of your choices, where they just paid for services, that indemnity provision would have been full-on indemnity, and we'd still be having the same conversation. Do we have enough insurance? Because we'd have been on the hook for all of it. And so that's your issue, I think. I mean, and we just got to make sure we're adequately insured. And frankly, $15 million, that's a lot of money.
Until something happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else? Anyone? All right. Guys, I apologize too. I'm not sure. Do we have to go out and come back in?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, because
this should have been open, right?
We never
Okay.
did before. Back in the old days.
Yeah, good point. We never did before when we were, that's true.
We had a work session every time.
We didn't walk out and everybody
Just
go
hung
out.
out and waited for 6
This
o'clock.
has been open to the public, has it not?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been broadcast live. I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream now if you guys are done with business, and we'll just